Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Tuesday, February the 10th. One by one, yesterday afternoon, cabinet ministers all gave their public backing to Keir Starmer, just as the threat to his premiership reached crisis point. That peaked at a press conference by Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, who was begging Keir Starmer to quit Downing Street. The moment the cabinet had dipped their hands in the blood of the Prime Minister's premiership, that threat receded for now. Hours later, Starmer gave a performance to the Parliamentary Labour Party, which one critic MP said was the best I've ever seen him. The Prime Minister has bought himself some time. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Yes, Starmer has insisted he won't walk away from the job after a day that saw his premiership come the closest to collapse that it's been since he took over. Earlier, he suffered the mystery walkout of a second senior figure after Morgan McSweeney, with Tim Allen, the Executive Director of Communications in Number 10, executing his own tenure. And following Morgan out the door, Allen issued a terse statement saying that the PM could now rebuild his top team and put out an out-of-office message on his WhatsApp with a picture of the Lynx and a cheery farewell. Gone golfing.
It seems like Tim really wanted to advertise what almost felt to me like disdain for the manner of his departure. I know that on the Starmerite side, Labour folk thought that was juvenile. One messaged me saying their blood was boiling over the way that he had gone. I don't feel we've quite got to the bottom of what happened with Tim, so we'll come back to that. But what matters is what's left behind, of course. Now, it stands to reason, of course it is the case, that having one's cabinet support you should be a given, not a masterstroke of political tactics, and one good performance at the Parliamentary Labour Party Monday night event may buy you weeks or even months, but the turmoil continues. This morning's political cabinet is expected to be, in the words of one government insider, spicy. I wonder if colleagues turn on Wes Streeting, more on that later. But in the next few days, maybe as early as this afternoon, we are expecting another senior departure. Cabinet Secretary Chris Wormold is heading for the door. I, like several others, have been told, given the timing of a Prime Minister in peril, I do think it's quite odd that the top of the civil service could be going through a transition period as well. But hey, we're in for a penny, in for a pound of transitioning.
For sure. Lots of pennies. So might Antonia Romeo, the Home Office Permanent Secretary, clearly enjoying her time with Shabana Mahmood, Pip Ollie Robbins, the Foreign Office's top mandarin, who had to deal with the small HR matter of Peter Mandelson's departure from the Washington Post as ambassador. Might she get the big civil service job this time? That is the scuttlebutt among the civil servants. And it does matter a lot if the aim, as we hear it from senior cabinet colleagues, is to reboot Starmer's lagging domestic agenda, make it more coherent. But there's competition on that score. Andy Burnham giving a keynote speech today at the Resolution Foundation conference in Westminster Central Hall. And the topic will be living standards, which is nice and broad and baggy enough for him to weigh in on the current situation and his own particular stamp on it.
He's not currently taking questions from journalists. I wonder if he'll be able to resist an interview afterwards, though. Right, yesterday Keir Starmer survived the day, but there are so many pressure points ahead. Just your daily reminder of why I think the Prime Minister ultimately is toast, though. And that is because it has been proved time and again that he can't command a majority in the Commons on difficult stuff. And everything else is soap opera. Everything else is play acting. So long as he can't do the difficult stuff in the Commons, there isn't much road left to run. So expect lots of trouble. But one other bit of trouble that I've got for you, Anne, exclusively for this podcast, is another flashpoint given to me for our listeners. I'm told that Unite, the mega union, has accelerated its plans to cut ties with Labour and begun a consultation and consulting its members about disaffiliation. Unite and its General Secretary, Sharon Graham, are now looking at making the decision at their annual conference this year, bringing forward the crunch point from 2027. I'm told this isn't really about Keir Starmer, as disappointed as they definitely are with him and Angela Rayner, who they've had a big fight with. But they're asking the question, what's the entire point of the Labour Party when it doesn't deliver for workers and industries. Look, I think we all know Sharon Graham is no fan of this Labour outfit. She's made so very clear, but this is actually about money. In 2025, when the year there weren't big elections, Unite gave 1.6 million, according to the Electoral Commission register I've just checked. So I think it is a big deal. Right, the electoral context generally is still challenging. Weekly Sky voting intention poll. What order will we do it in this week? Reform on 27, Labour on 19, Tories on 18, Green on 16 and Lib Dems on 14, all taken pretty much before the Morgan McSweeney departure was announced, because those samples were front-loaded on Sunday. Right, let's return to the inescapably biggest issue, and I want your take on the massive news of the moment. Where do you think Keir Starmer is after yesterday, and how temporary, Anne, do you think the respite is?
So, based on soundings and positions of people in the cabinet who've backed here, or are even thought of as being a bit to the right of Starmerism, such as it is, the view, I think, from them, as you've pointed out, many others have overnight, that there was a stepping back, wasn't there, yesterday afternoon? The Sawa call for Starmer to go, I think, landed badly. It sort of started as if it might really go somewhere, and then fizzled into saying, like, you haven't been good enough to Scottish politics, and I'm in a very difficult position with the SNP because of it. And I think that tone, really consolidated a sense that needed to be seen off. But if you look at the timeline, it was clear that the cabinet was already prepared to come out largely and support Starmer even before that. But the question is whether it lasts as long as May to the local elections. Very important, a number of people have said to me, not to be seen to have a regicide, because they think that would really unleash the demons and the splits which are underlying all of this in Labour. One person in a policy delivery role has said he's very stubborn, Keir is. He wants to be able to say, I have a legacy. And we should be quite careful about not making that difficult for him. Look at the terms of backing, though. If you look at Angela Rayner, she made clear that the agenda she wants Starmer to deliver is, guess what? It's her pet subjects, and particularly employment rights are in there. Obviously, reforms to leaseholds and landlords and all of that. But she basically says, well, we need Keir to be able to get on with delivering what I want. The devil is in the detail, particularly on that employment stuff, with some suspicions from her end. I think that Peter Kyle, who is much more growth focused in what he wants to be doing, could water down some of her approaches. Then you've got Wes Streeting saying the Prime Minister doesn't need to resign, which I thought was in the territory of he's the best Prime Minister we've got in terms of what it was really saying. So I think there's still a quite treacherous undertow here for Keir, but it's certainly true that the immediate danger of him just going off the Reichenbach falls this week has shifted.
I'm fascinated by what you say about people in the cabinet not wanting regicide, right? The alternative to regicide, if you want a change of leader, is that Keir Starmer must decide to leave the stage himself.
Exactly. That was the point.
And I think that's a massively underestimated, underappreciated point, Anne. I'm afraid I'm going to drag you this early in the morning back to the Labour rulebook,
the
2026 Labour rulebook, which you should have by your side. And it is the procedure in a vacancy. And what that says is, if the party leader becomes permanently, and the Prime Minister becomes permanently unavailable, i.e. Keir Starmer says, I'm off now, the Cabinet shall, in consultation with the NEC, appoint one of its members to serve as party leader, and hence Prime Minister, until a ballot under these rules can be carried out. Let me translate what that means for you. That means that if Keir Starmer walks off stage left, the Cabinet have to appoint another Prime Minister, while we then wait for about 8 weeks for the Labour Party to appoint and choose a successor Prime Minister. As far as I can tell, if Keir Starmer walks out the door and quits, we get 2 Prime Ministers, an interim one, while they elect a permanent one. And I needn't tell you how that would look to voters, to the markets. I do think that sometimes MPs are getting ahead of themselves with the conversation without checking how their own system actually works. And so that is a moment of massive danger, it just in itself. How on earth is that going to work. 2 prime ministers more. Good luck, Britain. Now, the big thing yesterday was everything around Wes Streeting. That's actually where the action was, not really around Keir Starmer. Now, there is some scuttlebutt going along, and some cabinet sources are pushing this, that, they're asking the question, were Wes Streeting's Scottish allies in on Anas Sarwar's call to basically for Keir Starmer to step down? Now, Team Wes absolutely deny this. Cabinet sources asking whether actually Wes Streeting had a David Miliband moment and was going to go much further than he did yesterday and actually call a challenge, and then he didn't. We don't know, but I think that Wes Streeting, as you picked up on, is kind of on manoeuvres in spades, and everybody can see it. The other big thing he did was to hand over his WhatsApps with Peter Mandelson as an act of clearing the decks to get a difficult subject, off the books for when he does run, whilst saying that, as you picked up, Keir Starmer is the best we've got. Let's give him a chance. So temporary, so transparent. My question to you, Anne, is, has Wes Streeting just very simply painted a massive target on his back by his activities that could come to a head at political cabinet this morning?
Well, fly on the wall, please let us into political cabinet, or at least let us know afterwards how it went. Quick thing on your really smart point about the rule book, which it's true, I had underweighted, and it is a really good point. But that's also why we're hearing this story about John Healey, that ultra reliable defence secretary, absolute party man to his core, and sort of acceptable to both of the main wings of Labour, why he is maybe the figure who is being painted up for this transitional role if it were to arise. I can totally see why you say it would be very traumatic and a mess, but it's not to say it won't happen.
2 visits to the palace. 2 visits to the palace.
Hang on, it's transitional though. It's transitional.
No, we cannot have... A transitional prime minister is still a prime minister with his hands on the nuclear codes, with the ability to pass legislation, with the full pomp and ceremony of an office. Labour Party rules crashing into the way that this country works. There's no such thing in our system as a transitional prime minister.
I'm just going to come back and say, if you're going to have someone with their hands on the nuclear codes, then John Healey is probably not the worst person to have in that role. Someone I bet to have a big spat about John Healey. But really, we wanted to talk about friends of Wes Streeting. As you say, this I'm sure will be some sort of topic in cabinet. Now, has he put a target on his back, or has he just done what he wanted to do this week, the health secretary with his other ambitions, the Thane of Cawdor? He is clearly ambitious. I don't think he wants to hide it anymore. So this thing about putting the messages with Peter Mandelson out there, and I think he just went and did it. I don't think he particularly, I don't know who you would tell, seeing as Tim Allen was out of the door as communications boss. But anyway, Wes Streeting just did it himself. Now, was this, as one critic said, subtle as a brick? It's obvious he's clearing the decks in case a vacancy should arise, and people may not like that in this present very nervy context. Or was it actually the right course? Because apart from showing that he knew the disgraced, formerly lionised Labour guru, Peter Mandelson, it's kind of interesting stuff in terms of them trading arguments sometimes and information in a sort of friendly and an informed way about, say, Palestinian recognition and the problem that posed for Labour. But there's not, as we've seen it anyway, anything in there that looks like it's very damaging in terms of what Streeting would call smear and innuendo. Now, his supporters say, therefore, he's in a much stronger position and that his numbers, were the vacancy to arise via the transitional prime minister, as we now know from Sam Coates, is this actually a much stronger position, particularly if the animosity with Angela Rayner is fundamentally overplayed? And as one friend of both of them said, they know how to give it large for their fan bases. They're acting out as they were at the Spectator Awards. It'll all be kiss and make up in the end. In other words, are we seeing a left-right ticket here in the making?
You said, is Wes Streeting inheriting the Thane of Cawdor title? What happened to the Thane of Cawdor? Well, that went to Macbeth and then he died.
Yeah, but But he got to be king. He got to be king. Oh, we're just not seeing it the same today. He literally did get to be king with a crown on. Oh, anyway.
Yes, moments before it all ended. Look, I think that views differ on the Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner kind of ability to do a deal there. There are some people who, to my judgment, were spitting angry with Wes Streeting and just don't trust him, and they've spent a lifetime fighting his type of politics. And I think if Wes Streeting is to unite the Labour Party, particularly the Labour Parliamentary Party, he needs to convince a lot of people who are a long way away from just a cosy deal away from signing the piece of paper. What else do you think is the ramifications of yesterday?
The Keir reboot is discussed in a piece by my colleague Dan Bloom, talking to a minister that he was featuring, saying that Starmer needs to personally front a lot more domestic policy the way he does with international summits. We're going to see him at Munich. That's now confirmed at the end of the week. There's a recognition that Keir has to be at the heart of things. They said. Obvious point when the pot is still simmering, as we've discussed. But if you look at what Pat McFadden trying to advance things on apprenticeships, on putting together that really important aspect of people feeling they've got opportunity in life, and the fact that they've been trying to overhaul apprentice schemes since the dawn of time. Now, there's actually quite good news there this week, some evidence that they can be better for some degrees for earnings potential, for a path through life for people who aren't going to go to university, or rethinking that, Sam. But I'd also like the credentialing and all this really the weedsy stuff. The two seem to have actually made some progress, but it's not the sort of thing that people are highlighting or focused on. So everything where you put in months and months of work, get teams together to deliver, as Starmer keeps saying, it's just snow in the wind at the moment, isn't it?
That's right. I want to pick up on a very, very big topic that has also gone under the radar. It's actually in the news today. The government has had to throw £5 billion at councils just this morning in order to forgive a whole bunch of debt linked to special educational needs, because the system is completely broken. The costs relative to the funding are just out of kilter. The deficits are in line to top £6 billion in a year or so, and the government has been had to step in order to do that with a sticking plaster solution. We're waiting for a white paper which outlines reform. I wanted to highlight this because I've done a long investigative film today with producer Joe Cook, where we look at the absolute nightmare that this government is facing trying to reform that system. We visited a school for children with autism in West London. We talked to the head of the County Council Association, and we talked to politicians of various stripes, and just the problem is really big. Just listen to the chair of the County Council Network, who's also leader of Suffolk Council, Matthew Hicks, who wants root and branch reform.
So the system's in crisis for many reasons, and it's really important that we see a root and branch reform of the current system. There are many children who come into the system where the parents want to get the best for their child, and that's absolutely right. But the scale of the demand has grown. If I just look at my own county, we've gone from about 5,500 children with educational, health and care plans to over 11,000 in a very short period of time.
Do you think that the government has got the stomach for this fight?
I think the government has to deal with this. It's not looked at. We can go back to 60 councils that won't survive if that deficit sits on their books.
So what ministers are going to do is try and ensure in future that kids, where possible, go into mainstream schools who have special education needs rather than special ones, essentially unpicking the 2014 reforms by Nicky Morgan and Michael Gove. Look, we talked to Nicky Morgan and she said, look, she's in favour of reversing this thrust, but just says it's going to end up costing more than the current system, the costs of which are ballooning rapidly rather than less. So don't think that the Treasury is going to get savings. So that's a massive problem. But we also talked to Liberal Democrat Ed Davey, and he's, of course, got a disabled son, is very familiar with the whole system. And he made clear the scale of the political fight ahead if they try to change the rights that parents and children with special educational needs have at the moment. Listen to what he'd fight for.
Yeah, it's not working for the children, young people. It's not working for parents. And I think a lot of the people who are in it are frustrated by it.
For the principle of money following a child with special needs.
That's a huge principle, really important.
And that's something you would fight to protect?
Yeah, 100%. Those legal rights are critical. Yes, we will. The question, of course, though, to go back to your initial point, was, are EHCPs the thing that we would go to the wall on? No, but we need the legal rights protected, we need the funding, but we need to organise in a much better way. They're looking to narrowly at the thing that's in front of them. They're not looking at a transformation of the system.
So all of this in the context of Keir Starmer's strength. The rights that need to change are enshrined in law, but taking votes to the House of Commons, in order to water down those votes in this Parliament, I just really struggle with that. There'll be a white paper soon. We'll find out exactly what ministers want to do, but some of the things they've been discussing are pretty punchy. I think that this is something that is close to being on ice because of the political turmoil. Let's see if I'm proved wrong.
It's a reminder, isn't it, that there are real world consequences when policy is off track or neglected, and whether there's any way out of those woods for Keir Starmer on that. And it's a subject which we know by our mailbags touches a lot of people and very strong views. And just before I head off, any listeners who might still be wondering about what's going on outside the UK, because apparently that still exists, do check out our new Monday to Thursday Brussels Playbook podcast. It's launching today with my colleague Zoya Jevtalovich on the mic. You can hear how the EU might get Ukraine into the bloc sooner than has been anticipated and what that might mean, and your own bespoke dose of European alignment from that very good source.
Hang on, are you being disloyal?
Being super loyal.
That's noted. One person who is loyal, Evan, our producer, whose 100th episode it is today. We couldn't do this without him. It just leaves us to wrap up and say we'll see you back for Prime Minister's questions tomorrow. That'll be a spicy one. See you in 24 hours.
I hope to see you for the next 100, Sam, if we haven't sacked each other by then.